So Puss in Boots, The Last Wish. Yeah, it's once again we're back with Puss in Boots, the character who's been around in the Shrek world since wow, almost like 20 years now. And for a character who's been around that long, it would feel like a film like this, especially one that kind of recognizes the fact that Puss is getting older and that this character's been around for a long enough time, it would feel like there's not much gas in coming back to this franchise. But surprisingly, very much a surprise, like this film actually works for what it sets out to be. And the thing is, like, it could have just gone on autopilot because you see, especially for like the first act, I was kind of like, like feeling like I don't know about this first act. It's like I don't know where they're going with this. I don't know if I kind of dig the kind of gags that they're going to do here. But then slowly, as I think it built up on its themes of coming to terms with your own mortality and just like, desiring more out of life, I think the story here actually really comes together while still looking stylish. Like it looked, the animation itself looked amazing from the trailers and everything, and it still looks great here. And it helps that you have a story that actually carries some greater emotional heft than just being, like the standard fairy tale satire that we've seen in like all the Shrek films and the Puss in Boots stuff. So the story this time around is Puss in Boots, once again voiced by Antonio Banderas, once more hamming it up in the role as best he can with his deep voice, is basically realized that he's not going to live forever. He's used up just about all of his 9 lives and realizes that, I'm on my last one. I've kind of wasted them because I've laughed at death this whole time, but, death comes for us all, so what are you going to do? And death literally comes for Puss in Boots in the form of this Grim Reaper character, this kind of like wolf carrying scythes. I think, is it scythes or like, I think it's, no, it's not a scythe. It's like sickles, basically. I was going to say scythe because, Grim Reaper, but essentially the Grim Reaper has come for Puss in Boots and it's like, look, I know your time is up. It's going to be up soon, and I know you're going to screw up. And so Puss in Boots basically realizes I can't keep doing the hero bit anymore since I've used up so many of my lives and so many action-packed sequences, especially like the one at the beginning where all it takes is one mistake and he's dead. And realizing this, Puss basically decides to retire. He moves in with a crazy cat lady who has a bunch of other weird-looking cats. But then eventually he realizes that, oh wait, there's a I think it's like a shooting star that's fallen, and that if you find it, after acquiring this magical map, you can make your ultimate wish. And of course, Puss desires more life, so obviously that's his wish, and he sets off for that. Now, of course, for adults watching this, they know that's not going to be the wish. They know that eventually, the journey is going to be what matters, and that he's going to learn that there's more to life than immortality, and that, accepting your fate and that you might die someday will bring you contentment, and that it'll bring you together with other people, So he makes few friends along the way. He meets Kitty Softpaws, played by Selma Hayek, who essentially, she's a thief. She ends up being a love interest, and of course, she needs to realize that she needs to rely on other people in the same way that Puss needs to as well. So they more or less have the same arc here. And of course, you have Antonio Banderas and Selma Hayek playing off each other, which they do fairly well. I don't feel like they have as much like romantic chemistry. I think more or less through like the visuals, I think it's communicated more than the performances. Although I will say they definitely do have chemistry here. It definitely works. In addition to that, he also has the cutest, most innocent sidekick in this, a little therapy dog called Perito, who's voiced by Harvey Agulien. Yeah, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he's so adorable. It's in case like, Puss and Kitty doing like, like the standard, like, cute kitty look, which they've been doing forever, wasn't cute enough. You also have like a little dog who's even more innocent and more pure. And of course he becomes the heart and soul and, pushes Puss to be a better person. Well, at the same time, just being hilarious with all his, he has probably some of the funniest lines, and I think it's mostly just because he kind of cusses at one point. Like it's censored out for this, but like they make the joke like, oh, he's saying dirty words and all that. So you get a little bit of fun out of that. Now the central villain in all this, aside from like the Grim Reaper, who's like the ultimate villain, is you have John Mulaney voicing Little Jack Horner. Except in this version, he has the nickname of Big. So it's like only his head is small, I think, and then everything else about him is huge. So Jack has made his entire life just as essentially kind of like a gangster slash collector of fairy tale artifacts. So you get a lot of fun stuff with him, kind of using all these elements of fairy tales to sort of like just pilfer and build up his collection, which adds to like the caper element, which works really well here. And plus, like Mulaney's performance is pretty good for, you know, having like this kind of like knowing nature to Jack Horner, and giving like the character more of his own depth instead of just doing like the same gimmick with the thumb. They do a little bit of the whole like, you know, sticking the thumb in the pie thing. There's a few jokes about that, just enough so that it doesn't exhaust. And I think that it helps that there's an abundance of like other fairy tale stuff for him to tap into. In particular, I like the aspect of having Jiminy Cricket try to like be his conscience, but realizing that Jack's kind of a lost cause. So like it's great. You get to see like Jiminy try to find like the innocence and try to advocate for some good in humanity, and Jack just keeps subverting it at every time, just misusing all of the lore within like fairy tales and all like the thematic elements for more sinister desires. So I kind of like that conflict. It's decently set up and it's used just enough where you never get tired of it. So he's a good villain, although like the Death Wolf, I guess you want to call him, voiced by Wagner Moura, is so much fun too. Like I dug his performance, especially since he's full on sinister in this film. Like up to like the last scene in the film where it's kind of like a surrender or a contentment with death, he's mostly just straight up evil throughout the picture. Like we're like like I was gonna say, like you get a little bit into like seventh like the seventh seal type territory here, a little bit. Like there's like twinges of like little hints of it you can see here and there, but I think that's more or less just the whole existentialism that comes with Puss coming to the realization of his own mortality. And as if all that weren't enough, you also have Goldilocks and her three bears, who are also after the treasure here, just to give like a little bit more depth and a little bit more of a challenge for Puss, as opposed to just relying on just like a handful of villains. There's a lot of villains here, and you really get to like Goldilocks and the three bears, especially since the bears themselves are more proper and they're refined enough where like they'll shout and they'll scream and they'll roar and they'll use their claws. But then when it comes to intimidation, they'll kind of be a little bit more prim and proper, kind of like, typical gangsters. And then having Goldilocks just kind of like being this, frizzy-haired warrior wielding a staff is so cool. You get a lot of fun fight scenes with her. That's just like all these elements, when you use just enough of them, I feel really come together well in this film, where I was surprised by how much I was invested in Puss over time. Like, you kind of gotta get through like the first act with a lot of like the typical cat jokes that they have here, with like cats scratching down walls and Puss hanging out with like the crazy cat lady and all these other cats. It's once you get through all that stuff, the film really takes off, and I love it so much after that point. Especially the visuals here are amazing. Like, I love the fact that the magical map they have changes the world depending on who is holding it, so you get a lot of changes in environments, and by the time you get up to like the big shooting star, which will grant the last wish, there's all this color going about the screen, and it's such like a trippy sight. And I also got to really appreciate the extra touch of having like the reduced frames for the action sequences. So if you're familiar with the Spider-Man like Into the Spider-Verse, how they would essentially operate not so much on like twos, but kind of like a reduced frame rate so that there's more key poses you can pick out. They do that for all the action scenes specifically. and it kind of gives it a nice touch. It kind of feels a little bit more dynamic. It slows it down enough where like you can appreciate the sights of like Puss scaling up this giant, or dashing around like fighting people with swords. And then when you have like the slower moments of like emotion and showing expression in faces, you can have that smoother frame rate with the animation. And I feel like dicing that up works so well because it has this very refreshing nature where it feels like you're not just seeing the same thing over and over here. And like and especially with how many CGI animated films are so fluid with the action, you wish there was like something better to them. Having this dynamic nature is great because it allows for so many cool shots and it lets you appreciate them without just being blinded by like the blur of everything that's going on in the chaos. So, honestly, you know, for taking all like the fairy tale elements here and kind of weaving them together into this tale about mortality and putting yourself above others, this works. So yeah, surprise, I actually really dug Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I have no clue if this is going to be the last Puss in Boots film. It seems like it might be, just because like they hint at the cat's mortality and that he might not be able to do this forever. But hey, if this is going to be the last film, this is probably the best note to go out on.